The Ashford estate hadn't changed much since I was a child. The walls still carried the same paintings of dead men in stiff collars. The chandeliers still dangled like glass skeletons, and the smell, oak, dust, and legacy, was thick enough to chew. But today, it felt different, heavier, colder, like the house knew a war was about to unfold within its antique bones. I stood quietly near the back of the great room, too far from the roaring fireplace to feel its warmth, yet close enough to watch every muscle twitch across the faces of my so-called family. Cousins sipped from delicate flutes of champagne, whispering in hushed tones like children afraid of waking a sleeping beast. Chairs creaked, throats cleared, and then silence. Charles Ashford stepped forward. My father was nothing if not theatrical. Always poised, always polished, he wore power like an accessory, and today, his navy suit was tailored like armor, every crease and button screaming control. His silver hair was swept back immaculately, not a strand out of place. Even grief, it seemed, had no permission to wrinkle his facade. He raised his glass with a small smile, one of those tight-lipped smirks he reserved for boardrooms and executions. The kind of smile that didn't touch his eyes. "To my son Logan," he said, voice deep and steady, "who will lead the next chapter of our family's legacy? May he carry our name with strength, wisdom, and vision." A soft round of claps followed, some polite, some genuine, most calculated. Then he turned his body ever so slightly in my direction, eyes still avoiding mine. "And to my daughter, Claire," he paused, letting the tension stretch like a rope pulled too tight, "who will receive nothing, because that is exactly what she deserves." It hit like a slap across the face, sharp, precise, public. The room gasped as if they'd witnessed a gunshot. Aunt Meredith dropped her glass, Logan's fiancé choked on her wine. Even the housekeeper, Mrs. Fielding, froze mid-step with a silver tray in hand. But I didn't blink. My back stayed straight, my hands calmly folded over my lap, my face cool, unreadable. The smile on my lips wasn't for them. It was armor, and I had learned long ago how to wear it. He thought I'd be shocked, that I'd crumble, maybe even leave. But I already knew. I'd known long before the eulogy, long before the funeral. I hadn't returned to Charleston for closure or redemption. I came back for the reckoning. This wasn't just a man cutting his daughter out of a will, it was a performance, a final public power move by a man who lived for dominance. And I was simply his favorite canvas. Today, humiliation was his chosen brushstroke, delivered not in anger or outburst, but with the same velvet voice he used to dismiss interns and dismantle competitors. He never raised his voice. He didn't have to. Charles Ashford destroyed people with precision. And today, he thought he was burying me alongside my mother. A final nail in a coffin he'd spent years building. But what he didn't know, what he could never imagine, was that this moment, his moment, was the last one he would ever own. He had written the ending, but I was holding the next chapter. As he handed the floor over to his lawyer, murmurs rippled across the room. I caught Logan glancing at me with a faint smirk, his posture cocky, relaxed, the golden sun in all his ignorant glory. They all thought I'd sit there, shattered, humiliated, but I had waited a long time for this. The ashes of my mother's memory still hung in the air. Her portrait loomed above the fireplace, watching everything unfold with the kind of grace only death could grant. I looked at her now and whispered, only loud enough for myself. Let the show begin. Greatness had to be earned, unless you were born male. That was the first lesson I ever learned in the Ashford household. I was 9 when I realized it. Logan had just flunked his spelling test for the 3rd week in a row, and yet he still got his Friday night pizza party. I'd scored 100%, again, And my reward was setting the table while he played video games in the living room. I remember watching him from the kitchen doorway, the light from the TV flashing across his grinning face, and asking myself what exactly I had to do to be seen. I tried everything. I was the overachiever, the rule follower, the good girl with the perfect grades and the neat handwriting, student council president, debate team captain, lead in the school play. My mother clapped at every recital, slipped notes of encouragement into my lunchbox. But my father, he'd skim the report cards, say that's what's expected, and return to his scotch without even lifting his eyes. Logan, meanwhile, was the wild card. He crashed a car at 17. Dad bought him a newer one. Got suspended for cheating in college. Dad blamed the professor. Flunked out of Yale twice. Still got a corner office at Ashford Group with his name in brass on the door. He'll grow into it, my father said. Like greatness was something that simply ripened with age. I didn't grow into anything. I fought tooth and nail. Earned a double degree from Stanford in business and environmental engineering. At 23, I stepped in when one of our logistics subsidiaries hemorrhaged money. I restructured operations, slashed costs by 30%, and turned the division profitable in 6 months. The board applauded. My father offered a reserved nod, then invited Logan to give the closing speech at the next shareholder meeting. The message was clear. I wasn't the legacy. I was the insurance policy, the emergency brake, glass in case of failure, daughter. Still, I tried to believe in merit, that if I just kept performing, if I just outshined every expectation, someday the scales would balance. Someday he'd say, "I'm proud of you, Claire." That day never came. What did come was silence, the kind that buries ambition like dirt on a grave. My promotions became footnotes. My innovations, company property. My wins were rebranded as team efforts, usually with Logan's name at the top. The final straw wasn't even professional. It was my mother's funeral. She died quietly, at home, the way she wanted. I was the one who found her, the one who held her hand as the light faded from her eyes. I called the hospice nurse, I arranged the transport, I signed the papers. Logan didn't show up until the next day, hungover, still smelling of gin. My father didn't speak to me at all. Not a thank you, not a look. Just handed the eulogy to Logan and walked away. That night, I sat alone in my childhood bedroom. The wallpaper hadn't changed, still faded blue with tiny sailboats. I looked around and realized I had spent a lifetime shrinking myself to fit into a frame that was never meant for me. And then I found the box. It was tucked in the back of my mother's closet beneath her old scarves. Inside, a diary wrapped in a silk handkerchief, and a letter addressed to me. That's when everything changed. The envelope was aged, its corners frayed, and my name written in my mother's elegant cursive, Claire, in ink that had begun to fade. My hands trembled as I opened it, sitting cross-legged on the floor of her walk-in closet, surrounded by the lingering scent of lavender and loss. Inside was a single sheet of thick stationery, folded in thirds. If you're reading this, my love, then I'm gone. And there are truths I couldn't speak aloud, but ones you have every right to know. You are stronger than I ever was, and maybe braver too. That strength will matter more than you know. Because your father, he is not the man you believe him to be, and he is not your biological father. I stopped reading. The air around me thickened, like the walls themselves had sucked in a breath and refused to exhale. I read the line again and again. Each time the words felt sharper, more real. My mother's letter told the story of a man named James Carter, a man she had loved long before Charles Ashford, a man she had been forced to leave behind. Her marriage to Charles had been arranged by families driven by reputation and empire. She had been pregnant when the deal was sealed, and Charles had agreed to raise the child, me, on one condition, that she never speak of James again. It made sense now, all of it, the way Charles had looked at me, never warm, never paternal, always as if I were something borrowed, a debt never fully paid. I wasn't his blood. I was her mistake, her reminder, her punishment. And suddenly, I understood why no amount of excellence had ever been enough, why no title, no degree, no success could buy me what Logan was handed without earning. Legitimacy? In the same box as the letter was a diary, bound in dark leather, filled with my mother's neat script. Over the next few nights, I read it cover to cover. Her entries were honest, sometimes poetic, often heartbreaking. She wrote of loneliness inside a grand house, of raising a daughter in a home that didn't know how to love her properly, of quiet defiance, her investments in my education, the tutors, the early piano lessons, the push for Stanford. "In one in boarding school," she wrote, "but I wanted her near me, to protect her, to keep her kind." There was one entry dated 10 days before her death that froze me cold. "Claire is the only thing I've ever done right in this life. I fear what Charles will do when I'm gone. He'll erase her if he can, not just from his will, but from memory. He's already begun. The lawyer, Grayson, he promised to hold on to my video. He'll know when the time is right." A video. I contacted Grayson the next morning, requesting a private meeting at his downtown office. He was an older man, thin and meticulous, with a voice like sandpaper and the kind of stare that makes you feel like you're already on the witness stand. I told him I had a letter. I didn't need to explain more. He nodded, walked to a locked cabinet, pulled out a slim hard drive labeled with my mother's initials. "She made me swear," he said quietly. "Said you'd come, eventually." That night, in my apartment overlooking the harbor, I watched my mother come to life again. Her eyes were tired, her hair thinner than I remembered, but her voice steady and fierce. "If you're seeing this, Claire, then Charles has tried to take everything from you, but he can't, because it was never his. Not your name, not your future, not your spirit. You are not his legacy, you are mine, and no one can erase that." By the time the screen went dark, I was already planning my return to the Ashford estate. They thought they knew who I was. They had no idea who raised me. I didn't cry after the video ended. I didn't scream or curse the ceiling. I just sat there, staring at the black screen, listening to the hum of the city outside my window and the quiet beat of my own resolve building like a storm tide. If Charles thought he'd buried me with her, then he hadn't read the fine print on the coffin. I wasn't coming back to fight for scraps. I was coming for the whole table. My war room wasn't built in shadows. It existed in folders, fireproof safes, encrypted drives. I'd been preparing this campaign for years, even if I hadn't known it. Every time he ignored my proposals, handed my work to Logan, or shut me out of meetings, I saved copies. Every board vote I was excluded from, every budget I revised behind the scenes, every private conversation I wasn't meant to overhear, I remembered it all. But now, the pieces fit differently. I wasn't just a daughter rising against her father. I was the rightful heir to a truth he'd tried to bury with signatures and silence. It started with control, corporate, not emotional. A few years ago, after Logan's second public embarrassment at the annual shareholders gala, drunk, belligerent, and somehow still given a new role, I quietly began to buy. Not in my name, of course, that would have been too easy to trace, but through shell companies registered in Delaware, through former classmates and old colleagues who owed me favors. I bought shares, voting shares. And not just in Ashford Group directly, but in the subsidiaries that made up its foundation. Logistics, packaging, materials, even a tech startup Charles had foolishly tried to acquire using Logan as a proxy. When I met with Mr. Bellamy, the CFO of Ashford Group, I presented him with a 312-page document showing my stake, 28.6% of the Ashford family holdings. His eyes widened. He asked if I was planning a hostile takeover. I smiled. Hostile implies I don't belong. Next came the Alliance building. I reached out to quiet dissenters within the board. Directors Charles had silenced for years through fear and tradition. Some were wary, others eager, most were tired. I told them the truth. Ashford was bleeding from the inside. Charles was still playing king in a world that had moved past monarchy. Logan was a liability wrapped in privilege. And me? I was the bridge between the old empire and the future it didn't know it needed. I didn't need all of them. Just enough to tip the vote when the time came. The last piece was emotional. Strategic. Painful. I met with Evelyn Monroe, my mother's best friend, at a small cafe off East Bay Street. She looked older, smaller than I remembered, but her eyes were sharp as ever. "She always believed you'd come back for this," she said, sliding a sealed envelope across the table. "She didn't leave you instructions. She left you fire." Inside was a deed, my mother's shares, 9.2%, transferred quietly to a private trust, triggered upon her death, but only executable when I presented the original letter she'd left me. With those, my total holding crossed 37%, enough to call a vote, enough to make the room go quiet. Back in my apartment, I pulled up my notes, ran the simulations, checked the bylaws. Everything was airtight. No loopholes, no appeals. Charles had written me off. He never imagined I'd write myself back in pen in one hand, torch in the other. The reading of the will was held in the Ashford Estates private library, a room built for grandeur and intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined with dusty volumes no one read anymore, velvet drapes that swallowed the sunlight, and a long mahogany table that looked like it belonged in a courtroom more than a home. The chairs groaned under the weight of old money and older grudges. I sat at the far end, perfectly still, while the others shifted, whispered, and tried not to look at me for too long. Charles sat at the head, of course, his posture regal, expression unreadable. Logan lounged nearby, legs crossed arrogantly, fingers drumming on the armrest. A few uncles, aunts, legal advisors, and the ever-faithful Mr. Grayson, our family's lawyer of over 25 years, stood at the center with a thick folder under one arm and a hard drive in the other. He cleared his throat. "As executor of the estate of Evelyn Ashford, and under the legal framework established prior to her passing, I'm required to present two separate sets of directives, one from Mr. Charles Ashford and one from Evelyn herself." Whispers began instantly. Even Charles shifted in his seat. "What are you talking about?" he asked, voice low and sharp. Grayson didn't flinch. "Mrs. Ashford entrusted me with a sealed directive, legally valid and timed for disclosure at this very meeting. Her instructions were specific. Read her letter after the formal will is presented." We all listened as the standard document was read aloud. Logan received the primary estate, the house, the collection, the board seat. Minor tokens were distributed among cousins and relatives. Then came the final line. "To my daughter, Claire Ashford, I leave nothing." Charles didn't even try to hide his satisfaction. Logan smirked, but Grayson raised one hand calmly. "And now, per the instructions of Evelyn Ashford," he said, "I will play a video." He plugged in the drive. The large TV mounted over the fireplace flickered to life. The image was simple. My mother, sitting on a patio bench, her hair tucked in a scarf, the ocean behind her, and her hands folded in her lap. "If you're watching this," she began, voice tired but unwavering, "then Charles has done what I feared he would. He's tried to erase you, Claire. But he can't. Because you are not a mistake. You are not his shadow. You are my daughter. And you are everything I ever hoped to be." The room went dead silent. I knew he would never love you properly, she continued, because you were born of someone he hated, because I chose you, not him. But I also knew you would survive him, outlast him, maybe even outgrow the pain he caused. Logan shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable now. You were never meant to inherit his legacy, she said, staring into the camera. You were meant to build your own. The screen faded to black. Before anyone could speak, Grayson opened the thick folder. This, he said, is a secondary document, property of Evelyn Ashford, held in trust under South Carolina law. It includes a personal letter, a deed transfer of 9.2% voting shares, and a directive that those shares are to be released only upon evidence of good faith action by Claire E. Evidence already submitted and confirmed. He turned to me, sliding over a single-page document across the table. Claire Ashford now holds 37.8% controlling interest in Ashford Group. You could hear a pin drop. Charles's face drained of color. Logan's jaw slackened. The board members present began murmuring, some shocked, some nodding, as if they had suspected something like this might come. I stood slowly, calm, deliberate. I'm not here to humiliate anyone, I said, voice steady, but I am here to correct the record. I am not the footnote in this family. I am the author of the next chapter. And with that, the balance of power in the Ashford family shifted irrevocably. Charles was still frozen in place when Logan stood up, his voice cutting through the heavy silence like a dull blade. This is ridiculous, he scoffed, gesturing wildly. She's trying to hijack everything our family built. You're seriously going to let a video and a few conveniently timed documents change what we all know this legacy is about? No one answered. Not yet. Logan stepped toward me, puffed up confidence cracking at the edges. You've always wanted to tear this place down, haven't you? Always jealous. Always bitter. But you don't belong here, Claire. You never did. I didn't flinch. I simply turned to Mr. Grayson and gave a small nod. He opened a second file folder and calmly began placing documents on the table, one by one. Bank statements, wire transfers, redacted internal memos, photos, receipts, and finally, an email thread printed out in full with Logan's name plastered across every line. Grayson cleared his throat. These are financial records, compiled over the past 18 months. They detail a series of unauthorized withdrawals totaling approximately $3,100,000, 0 cents, from the Ashford Family Foundation, charity funds, earmarked for hurricane recovery, scholarships, and veterans programs. The room gasped. Logan's face turned the color of ash. Some of that money, Grayson continued, was funneled into offshore accounts under aliases. The rest was used for high-end travel, designer goods, and payments to an individual currently being investigated for blackmail and fraud. Logan spun toward me. You set me up. You planned this. I stared him down, voice calm. No, Logan, you did this. I just refused to keep covering for you. His mouth opened, but no words came. I could see the desperation bloom behind his eyes. His charm had always been his shield, but there's no charm in criminal records. The room didn't look at him like a prodigal son anymore. They looked at him like a liability. I told you to keep your nose out of my business, he spat, his voice cracking under pressure. And I told you, I replied, eyes locked on his, that if you kept treating this family like your personal piggy bank, one day you'd find it empty, and the locks changed. Board members began murmuring again, now with urgency. A couple of them rose to speak with Grayson directly. Charles finally broke his silence, voice hoarse. You went digging through your brother's life? Publicly? Do you even hear yourself? No, Dad, I said, and the word tasted foreign in my mouth. I went digging through our accounts, through the company, through the foundation Mom built. The one you let him drain dry while you played king and looked the other way. Charles's jaw clenched. This is not how we handle things in this family. No, I said, stepping forward, voice firmer, louder, echoing in the wood-paneled room. This is exactly how you handle things. Secrets, lies, boys will be boys, and girls will be quiet. Well, I'm not quiet anymore, and you don't get to lecture me about family when the only time you've ever acknowledged mine is when you're trying to erase it. Logan tried one last time, desperate, leaning toward the board. Look, this can be fixed. I've got an explanation. This is blown out of proportion. Grayson held up a final sheet. Your explanation can be submitted to the audit committee, along with the SEC and the authorities if they see fit. Charles rose slowly, but even from across the room, I could see his composure cracking, not just from anger, but from something more corrosive, shame. And for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. The room was no longer his. The legacy was no longer his. I had taken everything they tried to deny me, my name, my voice, my worth, and placed it back where it belonged. Not in their hands, in mine. The room had quieted again, but this time it wasn't the heavy silence of suspense. It was something colder, final. Logan had slumped back into his seat, eyes wide and distant, like someone watching the wreckage of a car he thought he could steer. Charles remained standing, one hand braced on the back of his chair, knuckles white, breathing slow and deliberate like a man trying not to lose control. But the control was already gone. I stood in the center not because I wanted to, but because there was no one else left who could. My mother gave me a choice, I said, turning slowly to face them all. She didn't want revenge. She didn't want public disgrace. She just wanted me to decide what kind of legacy I would carry forward. Hers or his. I looked at Charles. For a long time, I wanted yours. I wanted your approval, your respect, your voice telling me I mattered. But now I realize it was never mine to chase. Because you were never offering love. You were offering permission. Permission to exist in a story you wrote and edited and directed. He didn't speak. His jaw was tight, eyes narrow, but I saw it, the smallest flicker of something cracking underneath. Something human. Regret, maybe? Or the slow unraveling of an identity built on the illusion of unshakable power. I'm not here to take everything from you, I continued. I could, you know that now. But that's not who I am. That's not who Mom raised. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small box. Dark wood, simple brass clasp. I placed it gently on the table and opened it. Inside, nestled on a velvet cushion, was my mother's wedding ring. The original one. The one she stopped wearing the day after their 25th anniversary. She never said why. But I knew now. I found this in her drawer the day she died, I said. She never threw it away. But she never wore it again either. I think she kept it because she hoped one day you'd deserve it again. Charles looked down at the ring, his eyes flickering. You don't, but I do. Gasps rippled around the room, but I didn't care. I lifted the ring and slipped it onto a chain around my neck, tucking it beneath my blouse. This legacy isn't just buildings and money and board seats. It's integrity, it's accountability, and moving forward, that's how Ashford Group will be run. Grayson stepped forward with a thick envelope. Per the corporate charter, Claire Ashford is now chairwoman of the board, effective immediately. I turned back to Charles, steady, calm. You can resign quietly, keep your name, your dignity, or you can fight me, lose everything, and let the world watch it happen. Your choice. His face twitched. A small tremor passed through his hand. For a second, I thought he might argue, that he might pull one final trick, deliver one last insult. But then, something in his shoulders collapsed. He sank slowly into his chair and whispered, "You win." I didn't smile. There was no victory here, just consequence. No, I said. I didn't win. I survived. That's different. As the meeting adjourned, board members gathered their papers, avoiding eye contact with Logan and Charles. Some shook my hand, others simply nodded, but I could feel it. The shift. The old world ending and something newer, harder, cleaner taking its place. I lingered behind as the room emptied, just me, Charles, and the echo of the past. He spoke without looking at me. You think she loved you? No, I said softly. I know she did, but she wanted you to earn the right to be loved back. He didn't answer. I walked toward the door, then paused. She forgave you in her own way, and if there's anything left of the man she once saw in you, maybe you'll figure out how to forgive yourself. I didn't wait for a reply. Some things are better left unanswered. 3 months later, the Ashford group looked nothing like it did before. The dark paneled boardrooms were still there, the crest still hung in the lobby, but everything else, the air, the pace, the purpose, had changed. We trimmed the fat, cut ties with corrupt partners, revamped HR from the ground up, promoted women, people of color, people who'd been overlooked for decades. It wasn't about politics. It was about fairness, about building something worth more than profit margins and press releases. The Foundation Mom started originally just a side project, a pretty name to place under charity banners. Became a flagship. We renamed it the Evelyn Initiative and doubled its funding, scholarships, housing for single mothers, career training programs, not just donations, but investment in the kind of resilience she'd lived her whole life demonstrating in secret. Logan was gone. After a lengthy internal audit and a few strongly worded letters from the board's legal team, he agreed to step down and disappear. He moved to Arizona, from what I'd heard, some desert rehab startup backed by crypto bros and empty promises. I didn't wish him well, but I didn't wish him harm either. Indifference was the closest thing to peace I could offer. Charles, surprisingly, remained in Charleston. He stayed in the estate, though he no longer hosted parties or appeared at company functions. Once a month, he sent a formal report to the board as required. The first time he signed it former chairman, I stared at that title for a long time. Former power, former myth, former threat. Sometimes I wondered if he missed her, the real her, not the version he presented at parties or leveraged in business dinners, the woman he married, the one he couldn't fully control. I think part of him did, maybe the part she used to reach before bitterness calcified what little softness remained in him. And me? I kept her photo on my desk. Not the official portrait, not the carefully posed one in the pearls and the corporate smile, but a candid shot. She was barefoot in the garden, hair in a messy braid, holding a mug and laughing at something out of frame. I liked to think it was something I said. Sometimes when a meeting ran late or a decision weighed too heavy, I'd glance at that photo and remember what she whispered to me once as a child. You don't have to be louder to be heard, Claire. You just have to say the truth when it matters. She was right. And I'd waited my whole life for the moment to do just that. On the 1-year anniversary of her passing, we held a quiet ceremony at the Foundation's new headquarters, a restored library she'd once tried to save from demolition. We turned it into a community center, kept the old brick and stained glass. At the dedication, I stood in front of the plaque with her name etched in bronze and told the small crowd the truth, that she wasn't perfect, that she made mistakes, that she stayed longer than she should have in a marriage that bruised her soul, but she never stopped protecting me, even when she couldn't say it out loud, even when it cost her everything. After the crowd left, I stayed behind. I sat on the front steps, watching the light fade behind the treetops. I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of children laughing inside, the thump of a basketball on the gym floor, the muffled rhythm of a poetry class happening upstairs. It was quiet, it was beautiful, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was living. I took a deep breath and whispered to the wind, "I built it, Mom, from the ashes, just like you knew I could."